Proverbs 2:9. Az tavin tzedek mishpat mesharim kol magal tov. So notice in verse 9 today we get this az that begins. Now if you remember back in verse 5, it began with az as well. And so we get then, I think, as the result or the apodosis of the if that came at the very beginning. So if you remember this structure, we've got if you treasure, if you store up, if you love, if you desire, if you seek wisdom, understanding, all of these sorts of things. In verse 5, you get then you will understand the fear of the Lord. And now we get then you will understand. Call imperfect 2ms of the verbal root bin or bait yod nun. Now, again, I might have mentioned this before, but notice that two yod verbs, true two yods, meaning the yod is in the lexical form, can look very similar to the hiphil in the conjugated forms. But here we have a call. So then you will understand. What will you understand? Righteousness and justice. So righteousness, and you might see mishpat as judgment here, but I think this is more the idea of justice in this case. Next we get and rightnesses. So you might see the word yashar here. All right, you can see that there. So we have to do with having to do with rightness. Now the mem at the front and then the hirik yod mem at the end give us a few little extras onto the word yashar, but the idea is very much the same. Something like uprightness, or I think equity is how the ESV does it. So equity here. So let me kind of show you how I think this is working. Then you will understand justice and righteousness, or righteousness and justice. And then I think equity here is not a third thing that is being delineated that you will understand. I think that equity is giving us a summary of righteousness and justice, and equity is another way to think about it. Now, partly the reason I'm doing it that way is because of the athnach that gives us a break right here, that I'm interpreting it that way. So we get, then you will understand righteousness and justice and equity as the summary of those things. Then we finish the verse with another summary idea of the things you will understand: every path of good. Now, every, notice the particle of totality here, so it can be all or every. Here I've chosen every because we've got singular here and singular here. Then notice path of good as a construct. This would be an attributive construct. So this good is telling you every good path you might think of. Now, here's the kicker. Let's talk about this word right here, magal. This word is fantastic. If you look this up in Halot, you'll see that it means wagon track or firm path. Now, Dr. Jim Hamilton has kind of pulled this out for me and helped me to understand this and see this idea of wagon tracks. And the imagery is fantastic. When you think about righteousness and justice and equity, and you think about wagon tracks. Now, I can't do this justice because I don't have the right pens. But if you think about wagon tracks that are deeply rutted, but are steady and sure in the right direction. I think about your wagon wheels kind of dropping down into these tracks and being directed in the right way all the time. And because the wagon tracks are so deep, you don't get any veering to the left or to the right. You just stay in those wagon tracks. And so this idea, the imagery here is great. And I think path is what we get here or something like that. But if you think about wagon tracks, it has a lot more of the idea of, maybe we might say, the straight and narrow or something like that. And so when you look at Proverbs and you think about wisdom, we can't disconnect it from righteousness and justice and equity, these things that would be considered right living. So wisdom is not just an issue of like choosing the best of a good situation or the better in a good situation, but it actually does have to do with living along these wagon tracks that God has set out for us. Let me give you a couple of other verses here that you can hang your hat on with this word. Psalm 17:5 says, "My steps have held fast to your wagon tracks. My feet have not slipped." So when we stay close to what God has asked us to do in that path of righteousness and justice, our feet will not slip. That's wise things to do. Psalm 23:3, "He restores my soul. He leads me in wagon tracks of righteousness for his name's sake." Now, I read it that way because you get He leads me. And so these wagon tracks, if you will, are given to us by God. And he directs our paths in them. And so a lot of encouragement there. Wisdom, you will understand righteousness and justice in every wagon track of good when you treasure wisdom. So wisdom does have to do with right living and righteousness and staying on the straight and narrow. But at the same time, God is the one who leads us in that wagon track. So I hope that you're encouraged by that today.